have you all here tonight, and also to see so many familiar faces, people that I've known over the years who have supported work at the Water Quality Coalition, have supported the work here at the Community Laboratory, and also who have been citizen scientists working with us in the field on a number of different projects. About halfway through the presentation, I'm going to call on some of our citizen scientists to stand up and tell you a little bit about their work so you can hear from their perspective what it's like to work in this capacity. Before we get there, what I want to do is give you a little bit of a sense of the history of citizen science. This isn't new, this idea of citizens doing science. It's just that I think it's gaining a new face these days, and I want to tell you more about what I mean by that as we go. Duncan is going to introduce you to this new online citizen science data portal that he has really created for people to use, not just locally, but around the world, and it's becoming well-known and well-used, and maybe you will have use for it in some projects in your communities. So we want to be sure you walk away with an understanding of what might happen in the future, and what you could do in the future as well. So here we go. This is the community lab, of which you have heard tell. It's actually a physical space over in Karnofsky Laboratory. But beyond being a physical space, it is a community of people. And so many people have worked with us over the years. They join us in the field. They collect water samples. They may come back into the laboratory and analyze those samples with us. They may join us on boat ventures to collect specimens, all kinds of things. So what is citizen science? Citizen science really refers to the engagement of non-professionals in the business of doing science. And doing science means a lot of things, because there's a lot of stages to that scientific method or that scientific process. How long has citizen science been around? I actually needed to research this a little bit to give this talk. I knew that Rick Bonney from Cornell Ornithology Lab had coined the term in the 1990s, but I was wondering, is that really where it started? Because I feel like that people have been engaged in this business of science for a long time. So in fact, there's actually a very deep history to people collecting scientific data, and it was for all kinds of purposes, not necessarily in the service of science, because at the time when some of these data were being collected, there really wasn't a formal system of science as we know it today. And I just want to point out that I've collected most of this history that I'm sharing with you from a paper published by Abe Miller-Rushing et al. In 2012. And I don't know how many of you know Abe, but he is the director of science and education in the Acadia National Park. So he is right here in our midst, and a good one to talk to about the history of science. So back in France, 640 years ago, wine makers and wine growers were recording grape harvest days, and we have a long data record of what types of grapes grew well when. And then in Japan, court diarists were recording the dates of these cherry blossom festivals, and we have 1,200 years of records there. In China, citizens and officials have been tracking outbreaks of locusts for 3,500 years, so we have a lot of information on these pests and how they've affected agriculture over many, many, many years. And I know some of you in the audience today are interested in climate change and wondering how citizen science plays into our understanding of how the climate might be changing. And we actually have a lot of deep history from ordinary people who were curious about things, keeping track of things over a long period of time. And then even here in this country, we have different agricultural organizations and farmers who are just keeping track of time of harvest, time of sowing, pest outbreaks, and those kinds of things that help to inform us today. And so I don't know how many of you are aware of the work some of the early naturalists in the 1700s and 1800s, but Henry David Thoreau not only wrote Walden and The Maine Woods and other books that we're really interested in, but I actually went to look up some of his work at the Jessup Library and came across an amazing compendium of flowers and fauna that were coming and going from Concord during the time that he was at Walden Pond. So again, look at this, A. Miller Rushing was involved in a study of all of these notes that were made by Thoreau. And since that time, a number of what we would consider modern day scientists have gone back and they've looked for all the plants that he described and taken note of the time of flowering and the time of leaf out and leaf color change from all of the plants that Thoreau was observing. And it's turned out that since that time, everything seems to be blooming about 10 days earlier, and we've lost 27% of the species that were there when Thoreau was making them. So it's, you know, if no one had ever made these records, today we wouldn't understand the changes that are happening. So citizen science really fills two major niches as we see it today. And one, oops, sorry about that. We have these broad scale and regional projects. And they're much more formalized than anything that we really saw happening in the past. So there's the North American Breeding Bird Survey or the U.S. National Weather Service's Cooperative Observer Program. And these are national level projects where scientists have particular questions they're asking, and they're engaging people in collecting data or information and feeding it back to them so that they can answer questions that they have. So really citizens are in service to the scientists in this kind of way. And some of these more regional projects I want to bring up because some of our citizen scientists here tonight have been involved in these regional projects. We have the Maine DMR Phytoplankton Monitoring Project. They have engaged citizens all across the state of Maine in looking for red tide. And so all of these data are in service really to this state agency, which is tasked with protecting public health. We have the Maine Healthy Beaches program. Again, there's volunteers all over the state of Maine collecting water samples, like in the picture I showed you in the first slide. And then we have this Gulf of Maine, as well as Washington king tides. And actually there's a California king tide and a North Carolina. There's a lot of different states doing king tide projects where citizens go out and photograph shoreline inundation. In particular at the time of the highest high tide of the year, which is called a king tide. But also at other storm surge events, in order to better understand where are the greatest infrastructure needs in our communities. And then this other niche, the one that we're going to be focusing on a little bit more as we go through this talk tonight, is what is really termed community science. And I have to say, A. Miller Rushing, I think really was the first one to sort of recognizing these two emerging niches in citizen science. So we have some projects here in the area where there isn't a particular state agency or group of scientists who decided this is something that needs to be studied. I'm going to get a bunch of people to help contribute data to my project. There's a project called Maine Harbor Seals, where actually some individual people who were very interested in seals just kept an eye on them for a few decades. And these people have actually found their way to us, and we'll talk to you more about how we're helping them archive that data to make sure that it's available to the public and it can be used to help our understanding maybe of climate change or other things that might be going on in our environment. And so then there's this project that we have been involved with called the Litter Free Journal, and this project is happening down in South Carolina. And there's a lot of people that just can't take the plastic garbage on their beaches anymore. And so they are interested in trying to enact some plastic bag bans in their communities. So these kinds of projects, and we'll be talking about more of them as we go, are really generated from the ground up from people who have questions. So these are citizens driving the citizen science. So that's that were beginning to see. So one of them that I had on the previous slide I wanted to talk about was the Christmas bird count. How many people here participate in the Christmas bird count? See, a lot of people do that. And it's a really cool, who knows the history of the Christmas bird count? See what I found out getting ready for this talk? People didn't used to count birds before 1900. What do you think they did at Christmas? They shot them. Yeah, and they piled them up in big piles, and they shot little mammals too. And it was like a Christmas thing to see who got the most. Mommy. Yeah, and then around 1900, there was an ornithologist whose name escapes me right now. I should have forget that. Was it Chapman? And he was affiliated with like the early dawnings of what was to become the Audubon Society. And he had a different idea, like, let's just count them instead of shooting. And it's turned into such a big deal. People all around the country do the Christmas bird count. There's all of this data. It's now fed into the Audubon website. Scientists now do come to this data and mine that data for information that tells them things about how bird migration might be changing, or bird species or populations might be shifting. So what was born of, an individual's outrage, really, and something that was happening in the desire to collect data to try to shift the way people view things and perhaps lead us down a different path in our relationship with animals, we get this. So now, as we move from those kinds of activities in the early 1900s, today you will find a plethora of citizen science projects, both projects that are really created at those local and regional levels by scientists or state agencies, but also projects initiated by citizens on sites like this. This is a website called iNaturalist. And iNaturalist is a site where if you have something you're interested in that you are observing in terms of flora and fauna, and you want to make sure that for posterity that observation gets noted somewhere, you can upload that data into iNaturalist. So there is a growing body of data in iNaturalist on organisms from all over the world. And again, these data sets are informing scientists. Scientists will go in. You can't easily get the data out. I think you have to request a data set, but then they will release the data to you. And it may help to inform your research or set the stage for future research. Well, I have to say, we have long been working at the community lab in trying to understand the dynamics of eelgrass in our local area. And we have noted a number of things. Since 1996, this green eelgrass here in Frenchman Bay has been disappearing.
Is eelgrass good?
Eelgrass good. I told him to ask. Eelgrass is subtidal, and so most of us never see it. And to be honest with you, before 2007, I'd never even heard of it. I don't know where I have been. My interest, of course, was in water quality for many, many years. And people bring things to us at the community lab, always calling and telling us about their observations and concerns, and people kept saying that the eelgrass was disappearing, and I didn't know what they meant. So I went and found out about it. And it turned out that eelgrass is super important in the subtidal environment, here and around the whole world. The same species, Zostera marina, provides habitat, functions as a nursery, filters water, absorbs nutrients, takes nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water, preventing algal blooms and oxygen depletion. It stabilizes sediments on the ocean bottom, keeping water clear and transparent, and prevents erosion not only of the ocean bottom, but can prevent shoreline erosion because big eelgrass beds can mitigate wave energy. And then the thing people are studying a lot right now is the ability of seagrasses as well as salt marsh grasses and mangrove swamps to sequester carbon. And as it turns out, these aquatic forests sequester more carbon on the planet than all of the tropical rainforests. Right? So this is hugely important, the carbon sequestration capabilities of our oceans. And locally, we've been looking at the capacity of eelgrass to offset nearshore ocean acidification. Eelgrass can pull the pH of the water down and subsequently affect local plants. And so it's become increasingly important in Maine, where the soft shell clam industry is so important, that eelgrass be preserved. That is So this eelgrass loss turned out to be a big thing. It was affecting water quality, which was our emphasis, but also many other things. And so these are some of the activities of the community lab in terms of trying to turn the tide on eelgrass loss. Let's see. Okay. So we have been, we instituted a program called Seagrasses in Classes in our local schools. Actually, Jordan Bailey is here, and she actually created the Seagrasses in Classes website that people from all over the country find and call us, and they want more information on how to teach teachers and kids how to study seagrasses in classes. We also have been working with our local mussel harvesters and others on Frenchman Bay to help us protect and conserve eelgrass. And we have what are called voluntary conservation agreements, which are really unprecedented in the state of Maine, where people are just doing their own bay management by working together. A lot of this was very data-driven, and are being able to convince the local harvesters that eelgrass was important habitat for the species they were interested in harvesting. But also this involvement of citizens in restoration efforts. This has been a huge endeavor over the last decade. It's now 2017. We started this in 2007, and we couldn't have done it without Anna Farrell back here, who originally was our AmeriCorps steward in the lab, but now is the program coordinator for the lab. And literally hundreds of people and thousands of hours of time have gone into trying to turn this tide on eelgrass loss. And then we're going to tell you a little bit how more recently we've been crowdsourcing data to better understand eelgrass loss. But before we go much further with that, I actually thought that it would be a good idea to invite some of our citizen scientists to this meeting tonight so that they could tell you from their own perspective what it was like for them to work on some of these projects. And not all of them work with eelgrass. We have a lot of other projects that go in the lab. So they'll tell you what they've been involved with and what the experience was like. So I think first I will call on Trillium Sayre, because Trillium started when you were how old?
11.
11. See, people of all ages could be citizen scientists. And how old are you now?
17. Almost
17. So she's been with us a long time.
Yes.
That's right. And so Trillium also has clocked more hours with us than any other citizen scientist who's ever worked with us, right? So yeah, we track hours. I never gave her a medal, right? But I did invite her tonight. So say,
Well, yeah, I got involved at a pretty young age, which I think is one thing a lot of people are surprised by about citizen science. Is really, you could be like 9 or you could be like 90, and you probably have something to contribute because, you know, as long as you're not like a 4-year-old eating chemicals or something. So there's like a whole range of human beings can contribute to science. And I don't know, I've worked on so many projects. I started out just doing phytoplankton monitoring, so, you know, tracking the red tides and stuff, and then I moved on to doing eelgrass projects and getting into freezing cold water at 4 in the morning.
oh, I didn't tell you about the 4 in the morning.
Yes. Don't worry, there's more to it. It's just for the unlucky few. I moved on to doing the Maine Healthy Beaches project, where we track water quality at swim beaches. for me personally, I'd say not only did doing citizen science in all these areas really teach me a lot about doing science and about environmental science, about climate change, about all these important things that I am now much more interested in than I might have been otherwise. Also, it really taught me how to talk to people about science, which I think is really important and something that doesn't necessarily get taught. So, learning firsthand how to respond when some guy said, "Are you testing our water for Ebola?" It's a good skill. Anyway, citizen science, a mutually beneficial arrangement for all involved.
Thank you, And we have another citizen scientist here, someone named Carrie Duke. I think it's a good idea to come up front because it's being videotaped. So for posterity can.
It's good for my knees to get up and down anyway. I started when I was 11. No. I moved here about 10 years ago, and right before I talk about eelgrass, which I will talk about the eelgrass thing, I first saw Jane. I didn't really meet her because of something that came out of citizens of Salisbury Cove right here. We had a problem with people's basements flooding, and there's people here whose rooms were in that basement, one of them, and a couple of houses, and it was due to a lot more water pouring down, most likely from a housing development up a hill. And it was filling Hamilton Pond, smaller pond across Norway Drive. And we didn't have a little pipe underneath. We had no way for the water to move from one side of the pond to the other. And this was causing a lot of, it's the state's problem, it's the town's problem, but there was no science going on. So I had just moved here and my basement was bone dry, but it annoyed me. And my friends were looking at it. There was no data, and decisions were being made. So we gathered just a tiny bit of data: the size of the ponds, the amount of water that came in, what it would take, how much it would raise the water. Very little data. We didn't have much time, and we went in and presented to the town. And Jane was seated there at that time, being the community person she is. And I remember looking at her, and she was looking at me, and she was, as soon as I said the word data, she was like. And then I kept talking. We ended up getting our little sluice underneath, and
I was on town council. I voted for it.
Yeah. I was like, okay, I have to talk to her at some point.
Yeah.
Then my daughter was in Connors Emerson, and some friends of hers had heard there was something going on with Jane with different projects, and then we learned about Jane. I was working. So you don't have much time. I'm working, raising 2 kids, and I didn't have a lot of time. So I said to Jane, okay, if you've got something really early in the morning or after work, I can do it, And so then if the tides were right at 5 a.m., I'd go to eelgrass with these guys. And so I came in and we did all kinds of different things. We harvested eelgrass to then put on grids, which over my years of doing it with her, the grids changed, we learned, we had other people contribute. That's an important thing. People from every walk of life. I mean, I happen to be in science anyway. It's not really always what I do for a living, but it's what I happen to be in, but it doesn't matter. We have people come out and think, well, what about ceramic? Because they worked with ceramic. What about these discs? What about you're putting grids in, but they're not biodegrading? Well, what if you build them out of this? Well, what if you go back to the PVC? And it's just, and that's what it takes. It takes people from, that's what science is testing a hypothesis, right? And you don't, if you're isolated and you're just doing your one Ph.D. project, and you don't have input from all walks of life, it's not going to be as good as when you do. And that's all ages too. My daughter Paige told me about Trillium doing her thing before I ever even saw Trillium, and I remember when she was really young. And it's been great, and different people have different things to contribute. So I've helped in putting eelgrass in new places. I've helped with harvesting to put it there. I've helped with taking data on other experiments that piggyback, and this is something that's done I think not just in citizen science, but I know when I was going to sea for other things, you've got the boat out on the water. Let's see what other data we can collect. And so the people who were out there are collecting other data, and we were also collecting on when the green crabs came through, like a sea of locusts. We were looking at that. We were doing different work on that, and I could also sometimes, I didn't have much time, but I could help write up how we did what we did. Because everybody's busy, so if afterwards you just say, we went out there, we threw the grid like this, we surveyed like this, we went this way, it was this time of day, that's another way to contribute. You don't even have to get in the water. There's plenty to do right on the boat, but I too streamed to get in the water. And in fact, I have enough of my own installation, even inside the wetsuit, that when they're very young and light, folks have to get out because they're about to freeze to death. I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. So, and I've really enjoyed it, and I hope to do more and more of that.
All right, we got your name. And next, I'd like Edwin Bartle to come up. Who knew? He's my dog's friend. But he's more than that, because he's also a Maine master naturalist.
Yes, so I volunteered last summer in Jane's lab, and there are a couple things that really struck me looking back. One is I got a free t-shirt.
The reward story.
Really, really
Totally worth it.
and I got to work with Anna Farrell, she's a great manager and a great person. And kind of the daily routine was go down to the dock in Bar Harbor, collect some water, run a bunch of tests on it, often shoot the breeze with fishermen there, or sometimes there would be tourists there who would be curious, and that was entertaining. And the other thing, and then bring the samples back to the lab, look at the microscope, and I'm kind of a nerdy person, so looking in the microscope for me is actually exciting. And that was one of the things, and one thing that I think is important about citizen science, and was important in Jane's lab, was that it was fun. It was fun for me, and I think that to be a successful citizen science project, there has to be a hook. There has to be something that appeals to the citizen for them to want to participate in that scientific project. So those were kind of the personal things that were appealing to me. But it also had a much broader picture. I mean, this was a project that was involved in monitoring for the appearance of red tide. And there were a couple of times last summer where certain areas were closed because of red tide, and that was a public health issue. And so there's a direct effect of our daily activities, participating in this much broader network of other citizen scientists, among other people. And then I think there's even a more, well, not to say more important, but a different aspect, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, and that is science and scientists are either under direct attack these days, or in very subtle ways, the understanding of what science is and what scientists do is very poorly understood, and often very misrepresented. And so by getting more citizens involved in science and doing science and talking to scientists on a daily or weekly basis, I think that is so important for the betterment of our society in general. I mean, it's a huge issue, and I think this is another way of linking to everybody out there, and I think that's going to be critical in the future.
Thank you. Well, thank you, citizen scientists. They said things that I hadn't even thought to say, so I'm voices. And so I have to say that we were invited to contribute a book chapter to a text that's coming out on citizen science in marine and coastal environments. And we were asked to do the chapter on restoration. And so actually Carrie LeDuc is a co-author on that book chapter, which is pretty exciting to have citizen scientists who are now co-authoring with us. But one of the things that we realized as we were writing the book chapter is that there really is a project cycle. There's a restoration project cycle that we were all operating through, but these cycles exist everywhere in our lab. So in particular, people can be involved at different stages and they're still contributing significantly. I think sometimes people define a true citizen engagement as being involved from the beginning to the end. And we see many points of entry and contribution. I think one of the important things is that we communicate back to the citizen scientists how it all turned out. If they were involved in the early stages and not the later stages and that kind of thing. So communication is important. But I have to say that aside from this cycle where we're engaging people directly on the ground, we also realized that we had a need to try to collect data from more people around the state to understand what was going on. See, even though our eelgrass restoration work was going on well up until 2012, early 2013, in 2013, all of the eelgrass that we had transplanted collapsed. Right? So we had this devastating year where all of our progress that we were making just took a sudden turn. And we were wondering what to do with that. All of us together who were working here couldn't understand what was going on. And the first thing we needed to do was to figure out, is this unique to Upper Frenchman Bay? Or is this going all over the state? Is this going all over the coast of the United States? Like, what are we looking at here? And so we needed to capture some information on not only where eelgrass was still growing, but where did it used to grow and now it's not growing anymore. And guess what? None of the citizen scientist sites out there, not iNaturalist or any other one that we looked at, would let us address presence and absence data. So good thing that Duncan was working in the lab writing my quality assurance project plan. Because he also had some web skills and coding skills. And I said, hey Duncan, we need to create our own website. What do you think? And we did. We created a site called Eelgrass in Maine. That's the only thing this website did was collect data on eelgrass in Maine. And we put out press releases, and we called people at summer camps, and we got in touch with everybody we knew in the state of Maine, and we were on TV, and we were like, are you seeing it? Are you seeing it? And we had a really interesting result that came in. And it turned out that eelgrass was missing in Upper Bay areas. And I don't have the whole coast here, but it's true down in Casco Bay as well. But eelgrass was intact in the outer parts of the coastline. And so this helped to drive our research from that point forward, where we started to do comparative studies between upper bays and outer island areas to see what was different. So this crowdsourcing concept in eelgrass in Maine really set us on a little bit of a new trajectory in the lab. And so we figured if it was serving us so well, maybe it could serve the whole world. And so we decided to create a website and we called it Anecdata. Jordan back there, who made Seagrasses in classes, actually one day said, people are making these observations sort of anecdotally, but it's leading to some really important data. So that's where we got the idea for anecdata.org. And so this site, and I'll let Duncan take it from here because he built it, he can tell you how it works. But this site lets anyone who has a question, any group, any individual who's got a conundrum, and they're wondering if I could get some data into this, maybe I could understand. You could have used this back in the day, Carrie, for the project that you were doing. And so interestingly, people from all over the world are finding the site and building projects on there. The Eelgrass in Maine is just one of 48 projects on there right now. I'm going to turn it over to Duncan and let him tell you more about anecdata.org.
All right, so I'm Duncan Bailey. I'm a systems developer here at the MDI Biological Laboratory. I now build many things other than anecdata.org, but Anecdata is a free online platform where anybody can host their own citizen science project and start gathering, sharing, and analyzing environmental citizen science data. So just a quick overview on how anecdata.org works. So let's see, do I press the middle here? Where's the little laser? There we go. So users can join anecdata.org, and they can do one of two things. They can go on to immediately create their own project based around a question that they have about the environment. And so they would set up their project page with a little logo and a header image, and they can talk about what the protocols are. They can design all their data sheets. They can say where people have to go to gather the data. Or they can find somebody else's project, and they can share data readings, they can share photographs, they can share the species that they're seeing or not seeing, or they can share even just written reports. It can be very simple. And all of this data goes into a common, publicly available database that anybody can search across multiple projects if need be. And the data are all publicly available. So just here's one example. It's a Washington King Tides project. And this is a project that's run by the Washington King Tides group, I believe by Washington Seagrasses up there. And so what happens is during these King Tide events that happen twice a year, people will participate in this project and they will share images of vulnerable, I believe this is a causeway here that's just totally overrun. Or here, this is in Port Townsend, Washington, and this is, I believe, the Marine Center. And actually, interestingly enough, there's been somebody in Port Townsend who's been coming back not during King Tide events, but at other events where the ocean level is very high, and sharing, I believe there have been about 12 different reports for this location now. And so even though those aren't technically King Tides, those events are still very useful in showing. Yes?
The king tide is the highest tide of the year. Is that correct?
Yes. And so I don't think all of the photos of this have actually technically been King Tide events, but they've still been very important to gather because now we have this database of the same location over time, same angles, and you can look at all of these photos and compare over time how this location is being inundated. And all of these data are now available publicly so that municipal officials, researchers, anybody interested can immediately look at a map of all the places where these photos have been gathered and see what's going on. And beforehand, these King Tide events, photos had just been gathered on social media, which is great. It raises awareness and so on, but there's no central repository for these data, and that's very important. Again, down in South Carolina. South Carolina Aquarium, people down in South Carolina, they were totally fed up with all of the trash on the beach. Sea turtles are eating the trash. You know, it plugs them up. It's really not good. It's unsightly. All kinds of stuff. It's in fish. A large number of fish out there have eaten plastic of some kind, and it's just stuck in them. And so what they've been doing at South Carolina Aquariums, they've been gathering plastic debris off the beach and tallying up what they've been gathering. And they've been doing this through Anecdata. And so now all of these data are publicly available on anecdata.org for anybody to use. And yeah, so here's some people after one of their post-cleanup events. Lots and lots of, I think I was there when that was taken actually. Anyway, so what they've been able to do is gather these data for public officials to use. Also here, as part of our work, we actually partnered with South Carolina Aquarium to develop a custom mobile app just for South Carolina Aquarium's projects on anecdata.org. And so now, you don't have to go on a website and access data that way. You can just download the South Carolina Aquarium app and see a list of the projects. And if you're down in South Carolina, it'll immediately know where you are, and you can share data with their projects that way. And so, data visualization. This is a little visualization of the different kinds of debris that have been collected in their project over time. The project started off slow, and I think we took this graphic in the middle of April because the debris is now up here somewhere, September 2017. And actually the biggest item that they've been collecting has been cigarette butts, by far. It's awful. And so what we've identified here in the process of seeing these projects run, we've been talking about community science. We've seen so we've got the citizen science data loop. We've got people who have questions. Maybe it's just, gee, I'm interested in the environment. Goes on to project participation and observation sharing. And then theoretically, somebody is going to be analyzing the data, mapping it, and graphing it, and sharing their findings with the rest of the world, which might lead to new questions. However, in most citizen science projects up till now, the analysis and the sharing the data, communicating the findings, that's really been in the bailiwick of researchers. And so what we're trying to do here with anecdata.org is that we're trying to democratize this process so that all the citizen scientists out there can get the data back. So it's not going off into a black hole where they don't know what's happened to it immediately. It's immediately available for them to share with their local officials. And so what we're seeing here is that we've got this knowledge. For example, we've got these data sets that have been coming out of the litter project. And down in South Carolina, they were able to take, it's terrible, isn't it?
What's happening?
They were able to take data that came out of anecdata.org and take it to the Folly Beach City Council. And they were shocked. And the City Council unanimously voted to ban plastic containers and styrofoam on Folly Beach.
But not cigarettes.
Not cigarettes. That's a shame. That's really a next step. Who knows? Maybe the cigarette smokers will get cranky.
Cigarette butts degradable, biodegradable, or not?
Most are made out of fiberglass, actually. Yeah. And so, when Jane and I went down to Folly Beach this spring, and Jane went to Folly Beach, and she snapped this photo. This sign here is a direct result of the work we've been doing here with citizen science and the software that I've developed for citizen science. Yeah. Thank you. So, and Jane can drop in some more about the local voluntary agreements. Here. Sure.
Well, I have to say, South Carolina Aquarium and the work they've done there has been an inspiration to us here because it's like proof of what we've been saying all along, that we can take knowledge to action, that these data can result in policy changes. And so we're inspired here by the work that's come to anecdata.org, which is kind of interesting. So we also have a lot of knowledge that's amassing, a lot of data that we've collected, a lot of people coming together. I didn't talk a lot at this Science Cafe about the Frenchman Bay Partners, but you've heard me talk about them before. And I think that we are now coming up with local conservation agreements and policies, but what we would really like to do is, given everything that we now know, we really think there needs to be some state level protection of eelgrass areas. And so we're hoping to move our knowledge to action in the same way here. We know that eelgrass can be restored. We've done it. And we need to understand what else is going on in the bay that impacts these areas that we've been able to restore. And so we're collecting more data that we think will help to build our case. And one of the things that we're doing now is that we're going to be connecting with SciStarter.com. And SciStarter is a site where projects get connected to people. And so more people will find projects on anecdata.org and can drop in and can also contribute. We also hope to get a grant out in November to help to build some additional tools on anecdata.org that will help citizens understand how town governments work and how they can get involved in policy-making decisions, because I don't think people, first of all, they didn't know how to make graphs. We provide that visualization on our site. Now they have graphs. You know, how do you take it to your town council, and what are the convincing arguments that we can make? And so in terms of the site itself, we are interested in developing custom phone apps and web apps for anybody who's interested. We are supported by the Alex C. Walker Foundation to create a universal app for anyone, but we have a lot of people interested in customization, and we can do that for them. We hope that Anecdata becomes the go-to site around the nation, and we'd like to see hundreds of thousands of projects on anecdata.org. And then we hope that anecdata.org helps to drive public policy at local, regional, and national levels. That's a dream that we have. And with that being said, we're happy to open up a conversation about citizen science here. Do we have 10 minutes? Yeah.
So I'd like to follow up on the point made by the veterinarian in the green shirt.
Veterinarian in green shirt. Dr. Barton.
Dr. Bartle.
So it's clear that science is under attack in our country, even by our own EPA at this stage. And one might argue that citizen science would perhaps mitigate that by involving citizens in the process of data collection. On the other hand, the cynical argument that might be made by some is that, you know, scientists spend years learning how to collect data. They get things called degrees and other things, so the counter argument would be this: this might not be reliable. Does this system have the sort of integrity that is needed to really keep it?
All right, so what I'm hearing, in case you didn't hear it, is relating back to Edwin Markdahl's comments about reliability, scientists maybe not being trusted on the one hand, but on the other, those are the experts. And so does engaging citizen scientists in this data collection process, is it going to lead to reliable data that somehow gives them authority or better understanding in different contexts? And that's a complicated question that you're asking. And in terms of anecdata.org, I want to just say that each of the project initiators really has to define the level at which they want those data collected and define the protocols by which the data will be collected, right? So, so we're not trying to guarantee the quality or quality control all the data on anecdata.org. Now, within individual projects, there have been studies done, like even in the phytoplankton work that we've talked about, where citizens have identified plankton, scientists, and they've looked at, are they able to do this equally well? And certainly for lots of observational projects, it's been demonstrated that people can do these things. I have seen very young children do very difficult things with exacting precision. We have a quality assurance project plan approved by the EPA in our lab. And all those protocols have to be very finely adhered to. Our data are used to make public health decisions, and our data are used to post beach advisories in Acadia National Park, as well as around the island. So depending on the project, it can be done. It can be done. And I do think that when you engage people authentically as citizen scientists on broad levels or on long-term, more focused levels, I think you do build a community of people who can now speak to the scientific process and its integrity. There may be individual people that are lacking that integrity, but the process is a beautiful one, and we need everybody to understand it. So, I hope that answers your question.
Could you clarify for me the difference between Anecdata and iNaturalist, eBird, Coast Week, Christmas Bird Count, etc.?
Absolutely. So, for example, iNaturalist and eBird, those are very focused platforms. For example, eBird is just for sightings of birds, and it's a wonderful platform for doing just that. iNaturalist is a really great tool for building a database of biodiversity. So that's just for sightings of organisms, and basically how many you've seen, and some additional metadata. And it's really good at doing that. What we're trying to do with anecdata.org is we're trying to build a platform, for example, where you can collect data on litter, you can collect data on water quality, you can collect data on air quality, you can monitor, for example, we had a project where students across the state of Maine monitored the snowpack over the course of 3 years, and you can analyze all these data on there now. And so what we're trying to do is build something that can handle a much broader set of data than iNaturalist or eBird can.
But also could do birds.
It also could theoretically do birds, yes.
You should go on there. There's
Actually,
a beautiful meadowlark project on
Massachusetts
there.
Audubon used it.
Yep, yep. And they've been able to show a pretty incredible decline in their meadowlark population there. So, and they have been communicating back out to their constituents that they think they've got some convincing data for conservation measures that they want to put in place. And so these people across the state of Massachusetts are voters. And there were a lot of contributors to that project too. So the one thing that eBird doesn't necessarily do is you can't, you can like record bird sightings, but not always like what they're eating. So if you want to go into some other dimensions, you can set those up on anecdata.org.
You mentioned that when you wanted to start the eelgrass project, the existing sites didn't allow you to have historical data. You couldn't see the difference in time. And so I was wondering if with Anecdata if you could upload historical data somehow, like if there are data sets that exist in the past that people have stored somehow.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you've got that data in a spreadsheet, for example, we have a data importer that can actually let you identify what the different columns in your spreadsheet are, and you basically hit go, and it will all upload and be in there as if you'd entered it in all by hand.
Wow. So
Yeah.
it's not collected. It's not like just real-time data. You can put
No,
it
not
on.
necessarily. We've got a lot of historic data sets. We actually retroactively uploaded our entire water quality database in there. So last 15 years. Yeah.
Cool.
And the snowpack project had already started in 2013, so they were like beginning to realize the data were getting out of hand and they weren't accessible to people around the state. And so they were able to upload up until 2013 and then get the students and teachers involved in the project to continue adding data to it. So they actually felt stuck, like there was no way they could enter and engage into a citizen science-based website, and then they realized they had the capacity to get caught up historically and keep going. Now, Gail McCullough, the person I talked about who was collecting the seal data, those seal observations, she had done all of that by hand, meticulously since 1980 in a journal, and had identified each and every seal by sketching them. And so she is doing the arduous task. If anyone knows of someone who's interested in helping her enter that data, that is a citizen science project. To help a citizen scientist do their citizen science project.
Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, and she has amazing data, and so because she doesn't have, from the early days, she didn't have a camera, she's actually now photographing with a digital camera all of her sketches, and all of those are being uploaded as photographs, so you can go to the main seals, she has 2 main seals projects on there, and start looking. And so scientists have started to get interested in what she has in there. What I didn't realize is that, one, we had a bounty on seals in the 1960s. 2, that Richard Nixon was the one who was responsible for the Marine Mammal Protection Act. About that. And that as soon as that went into place, then the seal population started to increase, and that's when Gail got interested in, like, what can we learn now? Because before, you never really had a natural set of data because they were being killed as fast as you were observing them. But here now they're protected. Now we really can start to understand how these seals are utilizing different ledges and how they're moving between bays, and what they're doing with their pups and all of that. So that's historical
Yeah.
data, but it's a lot harder to upload. So
Thanks.
Yeah, the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions at the university has been doing a lot of the work very similar to how you described. Do you work together?
yes, well, John Peckinham, who's at the Mitchell Center, has done a lot of water quality work over the years with different groups, and he's done some work with school kids, and their data have not been uploaded yet. And we collaborated with him on a recent project called NEST, and actually Anna Farrow was responsible for helping to get people to work on collecting data for that. There were some people involved in that project and others that don't want the data public because they might want to publish on it soon. And they think someone might take it off the site and publish it. So some of the customization work that we see ourselves doing in the future is to help people work with private data. It's not really what we're all about, but we understand that in some contexts, people might want to keep data private. We actually had the, what was the Penobscot East Resource Center, I think they recently changed their name. They have a lot of fisheries data, and they wanted to start organizing it on anecdata.org, but they were very nervous about having all of this fisheries data on there. So they are toying with the idea of a private data portal, and we can help them with that if that's where they're interested in going, but that isn't what we're talking about here.
And that's a really interesting problem, because there are people whose careers depend, you guys know, on being able to publish the data they collect in certain journals. I mean, this even happened with the MDI bulletin years ago. If you publish something in a bulletin, oftentimes a regular journal would call you on that and say, well, it's already been published, even though we regard it as mainly a local data sharing type of problem. So that's an interesting problem to work on.
It is, and I've been reading a lot these days about what might need to change in science. But I think we might need to let go of some of our constructs as the world gets more complicated. And there's a lot of work that scientists actually cannot do on their own. And they are going to need all of us to contribute information. And I think that at that point, we need new ways of talking about who owns the data, who gets to publish it first, or how we all contribute in some way that doesn't look like the traditional scientific publication.
I'm pleased that the Acadia Rangers have recognized the worth of our northern rainforest, the short needle conifer and the mosses that grow under it. That's the answer to cleaning up our environment, reversing environmental degradation. That represents an environmental reparation. Clean water, clean atmosphere. The deciduous leaves kill the moss, and the trees go with it. I believe as the deciduous leaves come this way, it's a step to a desertification. Rebuilding the moss and short needle conifer, it takes everything out of that falls from the environment. Controls and releases water slowly, so we have a steady flow. I understand it even takes mercury out of solution that passes through. It captures atmospheric dust. The leaves kill everything, so everything falls away, our soil erodes, fire, and everything goes with it. Some places we just have barren rocks standing there. But if we protect this, the moss will grow over the rock. The trick is to be able to grow something, a plant on top of that rock, because now we've created an environment. It's something 7 billion people on the planet should do. I heard something last year, a presentation about the degradation of the environment around the world, and I mentioned this to the lady. And she said, oh, that'll probably work fine locally. And I said, fossil remnants have been found in desert regions of our country. So probably the whole northern hemisphere. So it's up to you people what you do, in the realm of a super buffer where water leaves your property, that the water be in better shape when it leaves than when it came on it. Is a trick to the whole thing. And also, our environmental degradation, I think, is a facet of a lost human discipline that's replaced by a greed that doesn't fear. I'm J. Martin Vashon. Look for me on the ballot next year for governor.
I just want to say that we have had watershed groups utilizing the site and engaging their neighbors and, you know, looking at the impact of runoff and that kind of thing into watersheds. And so there is room for everybody who has a question and wants to collect data to make their point.
So I'm sure Jane and Duncan will stick around for additional questions. Sorry to cut this short.
Okay.
We are sort of at our 6 o'clock time. And I just want to quickly mention to you all that our final Science Cafe for this season will be September 25th. And we have a somewhat unique presenter. She happens to be a member of our Board of Trustees. Her name is Dr. Josephine Solano, and she's a former executive with Pfizer. And so she's going to be giving a really interesting presentation on exactly what's involved in the drug development process and how pharmaceutical companies place a value on a drug once it's brought to market. So something that's pretty relevant, I think, for all of us, and she certainly has a very unique perspective on that process. So I encourage you all to come back, and we'll see you 2 weeks from today. And thank you so much, and thank you so much to Jane and Duncan.